Hey everyone, it's Andrew Nagel, Valk9 Designs, and we're back with part 2 of the hybrid design. Here I'm going to be showing you how I build the base foundation of the pendant. So this foundation is going to consist of the setting for the topaz, and then also a portion of sheet metal so we can add the rest of our detailing to this piece. You might have seen the piece already released because I have dropped it already. So yeah, we're going to just dive right into it. The first thing you're going to need is a strip of bezel. This is honestly a lot thicker than I needed. I end up cutting this at half, halfway through the video. And so I would recommend getting a bezel that is appropriate to the size of the stone, unless you're prepared to cut it in half and, save the extra for a different project or something like that. So what you're going to start off by doing is shaping the bezel around the shape of your center stone. If you're not using a topaz, obviously, it'd be difficult to find an exact crystal like this. So whatever you're using for your center stone, you just need to shape the bezel around the shape of your stone. So I'm going to start by making this little nook that the stone sets in, and then I'm going to continue shaping that bezel all the way around the stone until I have formed, this nice little rectangle that shapes perfectly around the stone. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but you want to remove as much space of air between the metal and the stone as you can. You want it to be as flush, as close as possible to the stone. That's going to make your setting cleaner and ultimately result in a nicer looking finished product. And so here we are with the extra bezel cut off. As you can see, there's some light that comes through, but the crystal's not exactly, perfect in all edges, and so it's not going to sit in there 100% perfect like a faceted stone. Faceted stones are much easier to build settings for because they're nice and cut and all edges are smooth. If you have the ability to smooth down your crystal, or if you're working with like a cabochon for this piece, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to build the bezel for it. And so now what I'm doing on the drawing is I'm just sketching out where I want my sheet metal to lay underneath the detailing so I can attach the detailing to it. I'm just kind of planning out the general shape of what I want it to look like. And so from this point, we're going to be taking a sheet of transfer paper. You can find this, I believe I got this on Amazon. But you can find it probably at your local craft store. I think Rio Grande. Oh, I might have even gotten this from Rio Grande. I'll look on the site, and if I find a number for you, I'll add it to the description. But yeah, and so what you're going to be doing is adding this transfer sheet to the top of the design, and then you're going to be tracing out where you want your sheet metal to be. I'm adding down just like an even, bit down there, so I have a bit more material to work with. That's why I squared it off at the bottom, so that way I can set the setting that we just built on top of the sheet metal while I'm soldering it and have a little bit of room to add more solder and stuff. So now I'm going to add this transfer sheet to sheet metal, and I am going to cut out the shape that we've just drawn onto the sheet. This is an easy way to just transfer the shape that you need onto the sheet metal. Obviously you can't trace a design on sheet metal. It's not translucent, so this is the way that a lot of people do it. It seems to be the easiest way to transfer your design over, unless you're etching it on the top or something. That's another great way to do it too, is just I've seen people kind of score the sheet metal where they want their design and then they cut it out. So, it's really whatever works best for you. So here I am sawing out those portions of the metal to cut out this base sheet. With the sawing, you're going to need a number 2 blade. That is the recommended blade for cutting silver. And when you're using the saw, you're not really wanting to push hard because it's obviously a thin piece of metal. You don't need a lot of pressure to cut through the silver. More of what's doing the cutting is the motion, the going up and down, and the blades sawing through the metal. So while you do need to apply light pressure to move the blade forward, you're not wanting to push a lot. Otherwise, you're just going to end up breaking blades a lot. And I say that from experience of breaking a lot of blades early on when cutting sheet metal. I'm starting to get a better motion, but I'm not perfect, obviously. And so this takes time to get, better at. So just keep practicing and just keep cutting the sheet metal. Maybe try and, cut out some shapes before you go for a full project. Try and do some like circles for moons or something like that, a shape you can use later on. But once you practice with it enough and get used to the metal and how it cuts, you'll be proficient with using a saw and be able to cut out any shape that you need. So once we've cut out the shape there, we're ready to remove that sheet, and then we can go over to the soldering station. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to cut this bezel setting for the topaz in half before we set it on to the sheet metal. Once you have that split in two, if you needed to, then you can use the flat edge that was already on the bezel to be able to fuse that to the sheet, and then you can file down the edges as you need to make it more smooth. Once you have your sheet ready to go on your soldering station, you can add your flux. I use the Handy Flux from Rio Grande, and I also have a couple of pieces of medium solder added to this sheet. I'm going to push them closer with my solder pick as I heat it up. For a piece like this, it's easier to use the little bits of solder, and then, if you need a little bit of extra solder, maybe come in and stick solder it, whatever's easiest for you, truly. I use a mixture of using the little bits of solder and stick soldering sometimes. Sometimes I'll underestimate with a big piece like this and just ultimately need more solder, like I did now. Once you get them fused together, remember, try to keep even heat across the whole piece. The solder is going to flow where the heat is, most. And with silver, the heat goes to the coldest part first. So keep an even heat across this piece as you're soldering this together. And then once you're done fusing it, goes dipped into the pickle pot or some water. Definitely let it sit in the pickle pot for a little bit, but before I'm putting in the pickle pot, I am going to clean up these edges and stamp it with the 925 sterling stamp. So over on my bench anvil, I am going to just take my 925 stamp and then give it a couple of light taps. Now you do need to add your maker's mark when you do these stamps. There's some regulation in adding a 925 stamp. The preference is that the 925 needs to be traced back to, a reputable source. So, if you're getting your silver from Rio Grande or Stoller, then those are reputable sources. And if you stamp it with your maker's mark, or even a Rio Grande maker's mark, would be sufficient because the metal was originally from Rio Grande. It's better to put your maker's mark on it because you made it, and then you have reference to where you sourced your silver from. So that's within regulation. I don't think there's any governing body that's gonna fine you. If I could be totally wrong about that, of course, and someone in the comments correct me if I am wrong about that, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just make sure that there is a maker's mark on it, and make sure you're getting your silver from a reputable source. A reputable dealer like Rio Grande or Stoller is fantastic for sheet metal. I know a lot of artists who prefer Stoller for the sheet metal. But yeah, so once you started cleaning up your edges on the piece, you're going to then drill out some holes. These are going to be some tie-down points for my design. I didn't really draw these in over the design. I just knew where I was going to be bringing my wires up and then curling them down onto the design up here. I'm just drilling a hole big enough for me to fit the saw through, and then I'm going to cut open those sections. I'm also going to cut open a window to let light through so the topaz can be backlit as well. Just kind of allows the stone to be illuminated a bit more. Tourmaline is another great stone to allow to be backlit, and other rock crystals are great for that as well. And so once you have those holes drilled, you're able to pop your saw blade open and very carefully feed your saw blade through that hole, reattach it to your handle, and then you're ready to cut out some shapes within this portion of the frame. Definitely want to add some burr life to that blade to help it last longer and to be able to get a more smooth cut. Then you're ready to start sawing that piece open. I'm now moving on to the setting for the stone. Just going to cut open what I need for that window. Be very careful. I was having a hard time holding this piece. I know the blade looks super close to my other finger there. It's actually not. That's just kind of a weird angle play. But keep your fingers away from the blade. Don't saw into your finger. That's not going to feel good. Another trick that would be to use some thermolock and to hold this in place. You could even fuse the thermolock like to your bench anvil a little bit and then just get it solid in there so that way you can saw around as long as it's flat and you're able to see what you're doing. You know, get creative with how you're holding these pieces there. I've seen some people super glue, smaller components to larger ones to be able to work it, to be able to file it and stuff. So do what you need to do to get the job done. There's no right or wrong way to do it, so long as you are, getting a efficient result at the end, or not even just efficient, so long as you're getting a good, clean result that is quality work at the end, it doesn't really matter how you reached it. And so here we are with more filed down edges on this piece and some openings for the tie down spots. I'm going to clean those up a bit more. Right now I was just testing the stone to see how it sits in there and to make sure that that window allows the stone to fully go through. I think I need to open it up just a little bit more, and so I'm going to open up these back spots a little bit more and then also open up those wire setting portions at the top. I will leave links for the different sizes of files that I used on this piece in the description. Well, not links, but Rio Grande item numbers. And yeah, I recommend getting varying different sizes of files. Again, you're going to need, I'm pretty sure it's also number 2 for the files that is recommended for silver. I could be wrong. If I am, someone correct me. I'm pretty sure it's 2 though, and that seems to be working the best. But from what I understand of filing is the 4 grit is more for like finer detailing, and then the number 2 grit is more for the removal of like big portions and shaping the metal. And so that's kind of what I'm doing here, is evening out the metal and shaping it. So I'm using a number 2 file on this portion right here. My mini files are also number 2 files, and these are great for shaping and removing material. After I check the stone here, I'm going to be finishing up those openings at the top for the wire settings for the detailing. I always like to check my center stone and just make sure it's sitting in there nicely. I think I have my back portion open enough to allow the stone to set in there appropriately. We're getting pretty close to the end of building this foundation. I'm just going to open up these detail tie-down points on the top of my frame just a little bit more. I'm using these tiny files. They are awesome for fine shaping of small places, and details on your pieces. So I definitely recommend, like I said earlier, getting a wide array of shapes of files to use. Your tool bunch is never truly completed. There's always going to be new stuff to get and new stuff to work with. So, it's just ever evolving. And so long as you're just ever evolving, that's all that matters. And so, yeah, I hope this helped give you all an idea of how I build my hybrid frames. Part 3 will be where we start adding some of the details, the other tube settings to this, and then soldering that all together to fully build the body of this piece before we move on to polishing and stone setting. So thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what you thought of it, and if you have any other requests for tutorials, please let me know. Have a wonderful week, everyone.